unable to start meeting. All right, we'll try that again. Is everybody in the meeting now? And if so, could you do an emoji to let me know that you can all see the screen and hear me? Right, okay, that's all right. A critical failure there. Thank you, Mike, for flagging that I hadn't, in fact, started the meeting. So we'll just wait for everybody to come in through the lobby. We've got quite a lot of people, I think, slowly trickling in. Right, well, I think we'll make a start because we are short on time with a very long agenda. So a very warm welcome to everybody who's joining us today for today's applicant webinar on the joint ESRC-DWP What Works Centre for Local Employment Support funding opportunity. My name is Annie Gibney and I am a Senior Research Portfolio Manager in the ESRC's Work, Education and Skills team, and I will be guiding you through today's session. And it is great to see so many people interested in the funding opportunity. I think there was about 200 people registered. So next slide, please, Megan. Oh, yes, exactly. So a few housekeeping notes before we dive into the agenda. First off, this session is being recorded for those who haven't been able to make it today. We'll be publishing the recording, the slide pack and a compilation of all the questions we've received and their answers on the Opportunities Funding Finder webpage in due course. We have the chat function enabled on the webinar, as you'll no doubt have seen. So please feel free to use this for any general comments, if you've got any technical issues, and introductions if you would like to make them. Although I must flag that if you're posting in the chat, it is possible that your name will be visible in the recording. For questions, please only submit these via the live Q&A option. This is so that we don't accidentally miss any submissions. We will do our best to answer all of your questions today, but we will be prioritising the ones that were submitted through the pre-registration process. And we might also have to take some of the complex questions away to make sure that we give you the right answer. But in any case, all of the questions will be answered via the FAQ document that we'll be publishing after the webinar. For sensitive or confidential questions or questions that you don't feel comfortable asking here at the webinar, please feel free to email the team directly via workinglives@esrc.ukri.org. Next slide, please, Megan. Right, so we have an action-packed agenda today, and I'm delighted to be joined by 5 other presenters. We have ESRC's very own James Canton, who's going to be providing a high-level overview of the funding opportunity, joined by John Yates, Chief Executive of the Youth Endowment Fund, who's going to be drawing on his experience of setting up and running a What Works Centre, which I know the audience will really find helpful. Got Mike Jones, Deputy Director at DWP Central Analysis and Science Strategy Directorate, who's going to give us an overview of the wider policy landscape. Also be joined by Matt Russell, Director at the East Midlands Combined County Authority, who's going to be sharing his insights about the challenges that he and his teams are facing on the ground. And by no means least, my excellent colleague Francesca Lace will be facilitating the Q&A session. So next slide, please, Megan. Yes, so without further ado, I will hand over to you, James, to talk us through the funding opportunity itself.
Thanks, Annie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Canton, Deputy Director for Innovation and Public Policy at ESRC. And for around the last year or so, I've been working with the others on the call today to develop this really exciting funding opportunity. It's fantastic to see so many of you joining us online today, so thank you for your interest in this opportunity. What I'm going to do now is give a high-level overview of the opportunity and what we're aiming to achieve. And I'm really pleased that we've got some great speakers joining us today as well to give you some broader insights and broader context. But first, a bit of background on UK research innovation. So UKRI's mission is to invest in research innovation that delivers public value. Our mission is to advance knowledge, improve lives, and drive growth. And ESRC within UKRI has a specific interest in what you might call evidence to action infrastructure. So we're looking to enable better policy, better public services, and better outcomes for communities across the UK. And What Works centres are one of the main ways in which we look to do this, as they provide independent, trusted, methodologically rigorous evidence that's accessible to people who are actually making decisions. We've been involved in the What Works network for over a decade now, and in that time the network has really shown it can shift real-world policy and practice. However, as a country, we spend billions a year on public services, but in many areas we still don't have a strong evidence base or strong tools for policymakers around what actually works in practice. And this opportunity that we're speaking about today targets a specific gap, which is supporting local and regional leaders to improve employment outcomes. Next slide, please. So just a few headline facts. The full economic cost of proposals can be up to £15 million, and ESRC and DWP will be funding 80% of that total. This is for a single award. We're looking to fund one centre, one consortium, not multiple smaller centres or grants. And the centre must start by the 22nd of January 2027 and run for 60 months. There will be a formal gateway review after a 9-month inception phase. And during that 9-month inception phase, you'll be refining and co-designing your programme with policy and practice partners. This grant really is partnership driven, and proposals must include at least one project co-lead from either a UK-based business, the third sector, or a government organisation. So do make sure that you're starting engagement with non-academic partners early and make sure that they have a substantial role in your proposals. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the ambition, with this grant, what we're aiming to do is establish an independent, co-created, trusted national centre of excellence that supports local and regional employment outcomes. And there are 3 parts to that. The first is we're looking to generate robust evidence on which local levers actually enable people to access work, but really importantly as well, remain in work and thrive in work. We're also looking to build local and regional capability, so places can confidently draw upon and apply rigorous evidence themselves in their own policy design, practice and delivery. And third, we're looking to drive system-wide collaboration and learning across organisations, communities, and across the sectors that are involved in supporting employment outcomes. And that's because the levers to improve employment outcomes don't sit neatly in one silo and are often across those type of different organisations. Just 2 points I'd underline. Independent and trusted. That is really critical to a What Works centre that has credibility. And co-created as well is equally critical for the adoption of evidence within policy and practice. So this centre has to be built with users. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the actual focus of the centre and where you should concentrate your proposal, the focus is very much on the role and effectiveness of levers at the local and regional government level. In particular, the opportunity is interested in active labour market policies and collaborations, partnerships between government, the third sector and employers. But within these partnerships, they must be led by either local or regional government actors or public services, or they should at least be involved in them substantially in their design and delivery of those policies or partnerships. And also both ESRC and DWP are particularly interested in what works to support those living with ill health, long-term health conditions, disabilities, and those with caring responsibilities for those with ill health. And that's again to access, remain in, and thrive in work. Across all of this, you'll need to be very deliberate and considered about where your proposals are adding value. There's already a wider ecosystem here. There's other what work centres, other government initiatives and stakeholder initiatives as well. So we'll be looking for proposals that have a really clear understanding of that broader landscape and look to avoid duplication and make a really clear case where the centre is going to be adding value. Next slide, please. In terms of the specific objectives that we set out in the call, we're expecting the centre to do 4 connected things. And it's really important that these form a coherent whole, not 4 separate work streams, but are joined up across each of these. And the first is we're looking to convene partners and stakeholders across policy, practice, different sectors and communities to build a shared understanding of the challenges involved in this space and the evidence needs. Second, we're looking to assess, synthesize and mobilise actionable evidence, and that might include systematically reviewing existing UK and international evidence on the topic, identifying gaps in that evidence base, and also producing accessible summaries for decision makers, tools that can support decision making and guidance that people can actually use in their policy or practice. Third, we're looking to co-develop, test and evaluate innovative solutions, especially where there might be evidence gaps, especially where those evidence gaps exist, and support the adoption of innovative solutions that are proven to be successful. And that might be via small-scale trials or participatory research. And finally, there's an objective about enabling real-world implementation and learning, for example, through creating feedback loops and facilitating peer learning networks. Next slide, please. Now, a short but I think very important slide. There are a number of areas that are out of scope. So out of scope, people for whom work is not an appropriate pathway, interventions that don't have employment as either a primary or a secondary objective or outcome, activities not led by or substantially involving local or regional government actors, passive labour market policies outside local and regional control, large-scale or national programmes, again outside of local or regional control, and replicating the work of the planned Workplace Health Intelligence Unit. And linked to that, employer-led interventions are not in scope. If your proposal is centred on any one of these areas in particular, it won't be a good strategic fit for this call, and it's very likely that will be screened out early. Next slide, please. Now, What Works membership is a key requirement of this call specification. So before I hand over to John, I just wanted to say a bit more about what might be involved here. So you must apply to the Cabinet Office for What Works Centre status within 12 months of the award being made. And that's a process that's independent of ESRC and DWP. But your application will need to demonstrate full alignment with What Works network membership requirements. You'll need to demonstrate familiarity with the application process and also dedicate appropriate time and staff resources to actually undertaking that process as well. Some really strong advice. Please do read the Cabinet Office membership criteria and the guidance. There's a link on this slide. We'll be circulating that afterwards as well. There's a clear process on that website. Do acquaint yourselves with that and make sure that you're building that into your centre design accordingly, including around governance, independence, standards of evidence, and how you'll actually engage with and be useful to users as well. I'll finish there and hand over to John Yates.
Oh, hang on. Oh, there we go. Fab. Thanks, James. And lovely to not really see everyone, but lovely to be with you, or at least virtually. I saw some familiar names, so it's nice to be with company I know a bit, and nice to meet people I haven't met before. I'm John Yates. I'm the Chief Executive of the Youth Endowment Fund. The Youth Endowment Fund is a What Works centre that was established in 2019. It's one of the larger What Works centres and focuses on preventing children becoming involved in violence. So I was roughly where you are about 6 or 7 years ago, wondering about whether this was something to get involved in or not. I thought I'd just say a little bit about what exactly does the Youth Endowment Fund do? What do we do day to day, by talking a little bit about our strategy, because I think that will probably just open up a little bit of some of the things that we worry about daily and what we're trying to do. And then I'll say a little bit about 5 top tips I'd have for myself 7 years ago, and I hope some of it is helpful. If not, my apologies. If we jump onto the next slide, and jump onto the next as well, that'd be absolutely super. So each What Works Centre obviously has a different focus, and what the Youth Endowment Fund focuses on is really completely different from what you're focusing on today. But just to give a flavour of that, the Youth Endowment Fund is focused on violence prevention. So we're here so that no child becomes involved in violence. Now, lots of organisations are interested in reducing violence or addressing employment issues. What's unusual about a What Works Centre is the how. How exactly are you trying to deliver that vision? So our mission pulls that out. We're here to find what works and to build a movement to put that knowledge into practice. I think it's one thing I'd sort of pull out here. It's one thing it's not easy, but it's tempting to say we're here to just work out what works. I think an effective What Works Centre needs to be about changing practice and changing policy. So that's the mission of the YEF. How exactly do we go about doing that? If we move on to the next slide, there's only one other slide after this, so don't worry, there's a few words on this one. This is our strategy in one slide, and so if you like that sort of thing, take a snapshot or whatever, you'll find it online. It's not obviously particularly useful in the detail, because you'll need to do something slightly different about employment, but maybe it just opens up a bit, like what do we actually do, what do we worry about? And so the core of what we're always trying to worry about is, as I put it to new staff that join us, we're ultimately doing stuff that's shaded blue here so that we can do stuff that's shaded yellow, so that we can do stuff that's coloured red. So let me just explain that in a bit more detail. We're ultimately trying to fund good research. We say work here because it helps with the other wording, but we're funding good research. And we're doing that by, first of all, doing these systematic reviews. So some of you will know that term inside out, some of you it may be new to. A review that systematically looks as to what is already known about whether this works or it doesn't. So before we start doing new research, what's already known, so that we don't duplicate. Then we're spotting the gaps. Hang on, no one seems to know whether this thing works. And then we're funding new evaluations. I'm still now at the bottom of the blue. We're funding new evaluations to try and build new knowledge. But the blue in itself is a bit pointless if we don't make that information accessible. So then we're in the yellow. We're then publishing that information, hopefully in a way that people who don't read 200-page evaluation reports, which is obviously most people, will be able to read it. And so we produce something called the YEF Toolkit, which is, for those who use Which Magazine, is a bit like Which Magazine, but for violence reduction. It's just a simple summary of about 40 different methods that we've looked at and which ones are better than others. And then we produce particular guidance. Oh, you work in a school, here's guidance for you. Oh, you work in children's services, here's guidance for you. Ah, you're working in the police, here's guidance for you. Because we're aware that the general publications that we do might not work for particular audiences. And then on the bottom of the yellow, we're saying, how should the system change? So we're saying, okay, that's how the police should do things differently, but actually the rules of the game need to change to make it easier for that to happen. And then finally, in the red, it's all very well publishing what should be done, but most people don't wake up in the morning and say, please, organisation, I don't know, tell me how to do things differently. And so we need to actually work alongside people, build relationships to try and make change happen. So we're trying to grow demand for, oh, actually, I'm curious, I'd like to know a bit more. And we're trying to actually work hand in glove with delivery organisations and with policymakers to change things. But underpinning all of that, final bit in this slide is this purple bit. The organisation is trying to just make sure we've got a deep understanding of the sector that we work in. And many of you on the call will have that already in the areas that you're thinking of bidding for today. So that's the core strategy for us. Funding good research to find out what works, to work for change. So final slide from me, if we press on. Marvellous. So 5 things I wish I'd known in 2019. The first one is randomized control trials, RCTs, are essential to this work, and they're hard. And so many of you will know randomized control trials inside out, but so forgive me, but we're talking here about the highest, I would say the highest quality type of evidence on whether something works or not. It's useless for telling you all sorts of other things, but it's brilliant for telling you whether something works or not. The reason people tend not to do them is they're total pain, and they're very difficult, and they bring up all sorts of challenging questions, including ethical dilemmas about how they're done. But without them, it's incredibly hard to know whether something works. And so the first thing I'd encourage you to wrestle with is in your bid, are you determined to do them? They are difficult. And I'd encourage people to really commit to the approach. I'd encourage you in your bid to, and this may be a difficult thing to manage with requirements coming from ministers and others, but fast spend targets can make this stuff really hard because you really need to set up a trial carefully. And if you need to get money out the door incredibly quickly, it actually plays against a really good trial. So it's just something to wrestle with. Make sure you're hiring experts in your team. I mean, probably an obvious point. I'm not an evaluations expert. The YEF would have failed terribly if it'd been full of people like me. And then choose really carefully what trials you run. What do you want to focus on? I'd say, is this thing actually evaluable? You know, can we actually evaluate it? Is there a genuine gap in what's known? And the one that maybe gets forgotten is, if we prove this thing works, will anyone actually change anything? You know, is it if you prove that something works but it's completely unaffordable, it's broadly pointless. And so, is it actually changeable? Then the four other reflections, apart from the fact it will appear in my numbering, I can't count. So my second one, systematic reviews are the best. So again, apologies for those who know what I mean by these inside out. A systematic review that just systematically lays out, this is how we're going to look for previous evaluations and gather them together and find the average effectiveness of this type of intervention, I think are the best type of thing you can fund and do, and it moves knowledge incredibly fast. So if your plan doesn't include systematic reviews, I think you're really missing out on moving evidence forward. My third point, I think an effective What Works Centre needs to get off the fence. It's very sort of tempting to say, well, the evidence is very complicated and what we recommend is more research. Well, that's marvellous, but someone else is going to advise people on what to do in the meantime. And so I think you should try and come off the fence and say, well, we don't totally know, but if we were you, based on the evidence, we would do this. And so I think it's trying to be really high integrity about the evidence, but also be prepared to say, look, we don't know this is right. Based on the evidence, we think this is the best bet. The fourth one, number 3 here, plan change from the start. So I think it'd be very tempting, we found it tempting to just focus on, I've got a lot to do to design how we're going to do a trial and how we're going to set them up. And apparently I've got to find these systematic reviews and run them. It's quite tempting not to build the relationships, and many of you will have them already, but the relationships you need to actually take people with you to make change happen. So think about change from the very beginning. Who do you need on side to try and change practice? Finally, maybe a bit of a sort of upbeat, preppy point. It is really worth doing. I mean, I have found the job one of the most fulfilling things I've done in my career, and there is a real sort of sense of purpose to trying to get clear what does the information actually say and what is it that works. At times deeply hard, but and times deeply frustrating when you can't get to the bottom of what's right, but it feels worthwhile. And so let me encourage you. Someone sent in a question just asking a bit, just to close, on how do you become a member of the What Works Council? I know it's a requirement to apply. Broadly, if you're doing the sort of things I've been talking through, you're going to be accepted. They have 6 main criteria. You can find them online, but what they're looking at in those 6 is, are you genuinely independent? So is your advice independent of the people giving you money? Or are you biased in a particular way or saying what government wants to hear? The second is, are you really rigorous in the way you do your trials, or do you just sort of, you know, ask a few people on the street and conclude that's the answer? I'm exaggerating to make the point. Are you practical? Like, do you actually test things that are genuinely going to be useful or not? Is your information accessible? Can people read what you say and understand what you're saying? Do you build capacity? By that they mean, do you actually help people to really understand the evidence? rather than just think, what clever boffins these people are, but I can't put any of this into practice. And then, are you transparent? Can someone interrogate the method that you're using and work out how you came up with what you came up with? I think that, those are pretty standard things you'd have to do to be able to do the sort of change work we're talking about here. I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much, John, for that enormously helpful presentation. I think everybody will take something away from it, most definitely. So I will now hand over to Mike Jones, Deputy Director at the Central Analysis and Science Strategy Directorate at DWP, who's going to be talking to us about the wider policy landscape, which I admit is both complex and challenging. So over to you, Mike.
Great, thanks, Annie, and welcome everybody. Like James said, it's fantastic to see so many of you here and interested in this opportunity. I feel like I probably don't need to say what DWP is, but for completeness, I think I probably should. So DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, is one of the UK's largest government departments and responsible for administering the majority of the UK's welfare, pensions and labour market systems. Affects the lives of tens of millions of people, and we spend nearly £300 billion of public money a year. So anything in the kind of evidence space around all things at DWP has the potential to have a profound effect right across the country. So I'm going to say a little bit about why this matters to us, some of the kind of policy context to do with devolution of employment support in the UK, and some of the other policy things that are going on. But it would be helpful, I think, if helpful for anybody interested in this opportunity to be aware of. So I suppose the big picture, the UK labour market is facing a moment of quite profound change. There are lots of long-term shifts affecting it. So digitalisation, artificial intelligence, demographic changes, skill shortages, and then kind of very much in the public eye, rising levels of inactivity and youth unemployment that are particularly pressing issues at the moment. We've got 2.7 million people out of work because of ill health or disability. We do know that many of them would like to work, would benefit from the right kind of work, but the system around them in some cases isn't good enough at supporting them to access, remain in and progress in work. And that impact isn't just personal. There's a lot kind of lost output associated with that. And for those of you that have looked at the Get Britain Working Right white paper that was published about 18 months ago, we estimate that at somewhere around £130 billion a year, which is a major drag on economies, public services, and so on. There's lots of activities. There's lots of activity in local labour market support as well as national support, but it's not, the evidence to support that isn't clear enough, isn't accessible enough. And I think there's a gap around that point that John was making of translating evidence through into practical policy recommendations, so that if you are responsible for commissioning employment support services in your area, to be able to really say, this is what we want because this is what the evidence says works. So what's changing? I kind of touched on devolution, and people, I think, will be aware that since the election in the summer of 2024, there's been more of a recognition from this government that they don't hold all the levers that shape employment outcomes, and a view that increasingly the most powerful levers, not just around employment support, but around health, transport, skills, and so on, sit closer to the ground. And that's why devolution reforms, the Community Empowerment Bill, integrated care systems, youth trailblazers, Work Well, Connect to Work, and so on are seen as particularly important. So we've got that kind of quite clear policy direction of devolution with employment support and employment and health support. But when we talk in DWP to mayoral strategic authorities, to local actors, there are some consistent messages that come through. And some of those messages are things like, and I paraphrase, we need evidence we can actually use. We need to know what works in places like ours. We need support to evaluate, and we need to stop reinventing the wheel. So we need to know what's already been tried and what works in different areas. And this What Works Centre is designed precisely to fill that gap. So one of the things we've been emphasising when we talk about this internally in DWP is about how This is different from another research project. DWP commissions a huge amount of research across all of its policy areas, and this is quite different. It's intended to be, if you like, an authoritative hub on locally delivered employment support that is independent, rigorous, practical, and I think most importantly focused on real impact. Next slide, please. This is summarising some of this and saying a little bit more about kind of what we're looking for in a centre. So James has talked about some of this already, but I think of it in three blocks really. A focus on convening and building a shared understanding of challenges and potential solutions, so bringing together policymakers, local practitioners, the NHS, employers and the voluntary sector, and so on, to identify what the challenges are around those gaps in evidence and the translation through into policy recommendations. The second chunk that's really about synthesizing and mobilizing evidence so that it's clear, so that it's accessible and relevant to real world decision making. And then thirdly, John was talking about trialing and testing solutions. So where evidence is lacking, we see the centre helping to develop and test new approaches, working with local partners, and then critically turning those into practical recommendations for other areas. Next slide, please. So there's an awful lot going on in this space. I mentioned Get Britain Working, that was published in the autumn of 2024. I talked about the devolution white paper, but you can see just from this illustration that there's a huge amount going on at the moment, both to do with devolution overall, to do with DWP policy and employment policy specifically, but also in the health space. And I would encourage people who are interested in this opportunity, if you aren't already, to make sure that you familiarise yourself with this kind of wider policy landscape, because everything that we're talking about today fits within that framework. Next slide, please. And I know we had a question in advance. Many of you will be aware that we already have a phase of work underway called the Labour Market Evidence Synthesis and Dissemination Project, which is something that DWP has contracted with the Institute for Employment Studies. And the kind of purpose of that work really is to get ahead of the setting up of a full independent centre, to do some of that initial laying of the groundwork, to understand what the needs are of local actors, mayoral strategic authorities, where the evidence gaps are, what would be most helpful in turning things through into real practical recommendations. And you can see on this slide a bit of a timeline for the work that's happening under that contract. So initial user consultation, getting at that understanding of where the gaps are, what user needs are, coming relatively soon this year, and then some work on evidence synthesis, summarising the evidence that already exists in the relevant areas, and then a lessons learned report to come in April 27. So we'd expect whoever is bidding for the full independent What Works Centre to familiarise themselves with this project and to be looking out for the outputs from this, because as James said at the beginning, we're expecting a kind of nine month phase of kind of refining what the approach will be for the full centre, and I would expect that to draw on the work from this project that the Institute for Employment Studies are leading. So that's kind of a flavour of that policy landscape and the first phase of work that's underway at the moment. If I was going to emphasise one thing, it would be this point around the key output being the translation of evidence into policy and impact, those practical steps that local actors can take, and to steal the phrase from John, of kind of get off the fence and say, you know, what your opinion is on what the evidence says. So that's why we're investing in this What Works Centre in partnership with ESRC, and thank you for your interest and commitment to this. Looking forward to seeing the proposals that people develop. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mike. We're now joined by Matt Russell, Director of Strategy Reform and Insight at the East Midlands Combined County Authority. He's going to talk about some of the evidence challenges that he and his teams face. But just bear with us, because we've got a slightly different slide pack So Megan, maybe if you stop sharing these slides and I will share Matt's slides. Give me a minute here. I'm not the old technical stuff. I think it is these slides.
Thank you very much for flashing those up, and sorry to break the deck and send in something separate. I've also got Shelley Harrod on my team who's with me, who heads up our research and intelligence unit in the East Midlands Combined County Authority as well. So she'll do the bulk of the talking through what we're facing in EMCA in particular in terms of being able to access data and evidence on employment support. Just to introduce myself, I'm formerly of DWP and used to being on the central government side of employment policy, but back in September moved across to East Midlands Combined County Authority, heading up the strategy reform and insight team, which includes data research and insight. So looking at all the different ways that we can cut the data and draw together evidence on what is happening at a regional level. And I think it's fair to say, as an overview, some of the challenges we've got are certainly translating the data and evidence that's out there into regional level, particularly on things like barriers to employment support. There are a lot of things that are common nationally, but also when we then try and drill down into, but in this region, what is similar to what's happening elsewhere, what is different, what are the factors that are unique to us, we then encounter a whole host of extra complexities in terms of how we use and interpret data, and not least how we make it fit our geography as well. East Midlands itself, the way EMCA is set up, covers Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, which most people include Leicestershire in the East Midlands geographically, and then when we get data sets, they normally include Leicestershire as well. So even just trying to disentangle the geographies when we get down to working at how we can use employment data at local level becomes quite complicated. So that's some of the sort of the first reflections I'm seeing, moving from central to local government and using employment data and evidence. But I will hand over to Shelley, who will go through a bit more detail, some of the specific challenges we face at a regional level.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for allowing me to come along. So yeah, I'm Shelley Harrod. I'm the Head of Research and Intelligence at EMCA. Are you happy just to go on to the next slide for me? I've tried to summarise as much as I can, because I could probably talk about this for longer than 5 minutes if you gave me a chance, but I will try and get through this as quickly as I can. So I think Matt's probably just started alluding to the kind of the geographical level of data and how we struggle to get the insight down meaningfully. So, you know, number one, having it at the right geographical level, so that it's at EMCA, not just the kind of East Midlands region, but also having meaningful data that gives us confidence in the data that we've got. So it can be a bit of a blocker for us from, you know, designing our local employment interventions, because we've not got those indicators. So it's that kind of small sample sizes that don't give us that reliability. So, for example, the labour force survey, when you start to break them down to smaller areas and geographical neighbourhoods, those statistical reliabilities of data can then give us those challenges of not really understanding things. So, you know, when you've got your confidence levels, you're not confident that that data is giving you exactly what you need to make the decisions. And then kind of disaggregating that down to equalities or from socioeconomic analysis. Again, it's getting those protected characteristics on a more granular level that doesn't give you the information you need. It constrains you very much on getting that information. So that's kind of the first section on that. So there's the second is the challenges with access to data. So restrictions to data. So for example, employment data sets that link into health conditions, things like more granular data about the barriers from an employment point of view. So being able to actually get access to those government data sets. Some inconsistency really. So for example, you know, if we were looking at our partners and the data that Public Health England and NHS might publish, it's how we get that again across our areas. So for example, at the moment, if you're looking at our ICB, it goes into Lincolnshire as well. So that's a slight barrier. So having the data that's held within our local authorities. So we have 19 local authorities in total. So how do we aggregate that up to give us that data at our combined authority level? And also, the data that's held within local authorities can limit us slightly because it is held by the local authority, so we cannot access it directly. We've got our challenges from a governance and infrastructure side of things. So there are ongoing discussions strengthening our data sharing agreements, unlocking access to partner data, not just from our local authorities, but our health partners and voluntary sector as well. There's a lot of data that's collected, so we do need to broker that with our partners. And then the third box there has got our challenges from a data collection point of view. So it's about that slow publication of data that can hinder us. When we get data sometimes that's been published around employment trends, it could be out of date. So we're relying on older data, so how we can get that on a more timely manner. And then it's things like our administration systems that we're using. So inconsistent data because of system changes that can reduce our ability to track our outcomes and our information over time. Excuse me. I'm suffering slightly from a little bit of a cough. And then the changes, obviously at the moment, the big one is local government reform, so evolving local administrative boundaries and how that might impact on us when we go potentially for our region. There's there is a possibility of 4 local authorities from the kind of districts and boroughs up to 4 constituent councils. So that's a a challenge for us. And then our capacity. So this can vary again. I was talking about our local authorities. When we engage with our local authorities, our constituent councils have a lot more capacity, whereas you might speak to Amber Valley or High Peak or Erewash, who have less capacity to understand their data. So that can be a slight challenge because we could get more from one local authority than we could from another. So that's something that I think local government reform may hope to broker in the future, but at the moment we're still working in with those 19 local authorities, and we've got the way that we collect data. It could be fragmented or duplicated, that kind of unclear responsibilities or lead of who has data. So this is just an example of visitor economy data that we were looking at. That can be collated in several different ways, and that also is seen across the skills and employment sector. So subscription data that we can get access to might be collected in one way or duplicated or undertaken in various different ways. And then we have created recently our local evaluation framework around our evaluations, but we are looking at how we create a longer term evidence base for our funding. And obviously at the moment we had the shorter term funding cycles because we haven't had our single status. We have our small pots of funding still that we do for EMCA. So having that evaluation and the capability to undertake that consistent, robust evaluation, I think is a challenge. So if you go to the next slide, because I've kind of, I'm happy to talk more around any of those at another time if you want more details, but I just kind of wanted to highlight, the constraints of how it impacts on us from our local employment delivery. So we might have our incomplete insight into our labour market that doesn't give us our full information that we need. And then it's that misalignment to specific community needs on those small geographical areas, especially looking at our groups with protected characteristics. So the regional decision makers kind of give, we're kind of going on anecdotal information and giving some good proxies rather than actually giving more robust data that can be aggregated in the right way. And it becomes harder to evaluate that impact and for us to demonstrate the value for money around the interventions that we carry out as a combined authority. So we have, and the positive thing is, the good thing is there are a lot of good things that are underway already. So there are work that we're undertaking with the ONS on our harmonised subnational statistics. So they recognise that we need EMCA data, not just East Midlands data. We're improving our data sharing, so we're looking at what we can do around data sharing. So we're working with the Mayoral Data Council on specifically NEAT data and data on adult skills. That's just some of the work we're doing. There's a lot more to the Mayoral Data Council than that. We're looking at building our own EMCA data centre, so strengthening our governance and data sharing with our local authorities. And we have a workshop with them in March to try and link up on how we can make sure that we're all speaking the same language. So when we mention a figure on employment or NEATs, that we're all doing it from the same base. So it's that one source of truth. And we're looking at, embedding our sub-regional outcomes and equalities into the frameworks that we've got at EMCA. So that's a really quick kind of outline as to the challenges and the next steps that we've got here as an organisation. And I'm sure, other combined authorities have exactly the same. I know they sit on the Mayoral Data Council, for example, and we have these conversations on a regular basis. So I don't know if Matt, if you want to add anything to that at this point, because I have talked quite a lot.
No, nothing to add specifically on that. I saw there's a few things in the comments, but I'm happy to. I don't know whether you guys want to open us up to questions or if you want us to add or dive into anything more specific.
No, thank you very much for that, Matt and Shelley. I mean, it's really helpful, I think, for people to hear about the very real challenges that you and others are facing across the whole of the UK. I think it's very much, isn't it, it's about access to high quality evidence across all areas, sort of levelling the playing field and making sure that you know exactly what's going on in your local areas. So Megan, if you could reshare the slides, we'll just dive straight into the application process, which is probably of no interest to our speakers, but of great interest to our audience. And then Shelley and Matt, if you are available potentially to take questions in about 10 minutes, I will whiz through this section. Right, hang on, let me get my notes up to make sure that I'm absolutely saying the right things. Yes, so the nitty-gritty of the application process. Next slide, please, Megan. Yes, key dates, most important. And the most important date of which is that the opportunity closes at 4 p.m. on the 19th of May. Applications are submitted by the project lead on UKRI's funding service system, also known as TFS. I would strongly encourage you, A, to get in touch with your research office as soon as possible to let them know of your intentions to submit, because they often have their own internal deadlines and processes to follow. And B, please submit well before the 4 p.m. deadline. I cannot tell you how many people hit submit 5 minutes before 4 p.m. and there is always a technical issue and the stress levels are absolutely immense. So unless the technical problem stems from a proven UKRI side issue, we can't reopen the submission link and your application will be automatically rejected. Other key dates. We have our shortlisting panel in July. Only the top ranked proposals will then be invited to interview. The interview panel is in September. It will be held virtually to make sure that it's as easy as possible for people to access wherever they are in the UK. Shortlisted applicants will be sent panel feedback in August to help them prepare. And the final decision will be in October, with the centre officially starting by the 22nd of January 2027 at the latest. Next slide, please, Megan. Okay, so before I go any further, I think there's a word to say on eligibility. So the project lead is the person who submits the application. They must be based at a UK research organisation eligible for UKRI funding for the duration of the award. You can only be named as a project lead on one application. In terms of project co-leads, at least one project co-lead must be from a UK business, third sector or government organisation. We will also accept project co-leads from non-UK research organisations, but all of them will be subject to the relevant ESRC eligibility rules on their inclusion. Project co-leads, you can be on multiple bids, but to be honest, from my personal experience, I would not say that multiple inclusions are necessarily a good idea. They aren't always seen favourably by assessors who want to see commitment generally to one specific centre design. Project partners, subcontractors and consultants can all be included on the bid as long as they fall in line with standard ESRC eligibility rules on their inclusion. I would absolutely encourage everyone to have a look at UKRI's Before You Apply webpage, which gives some really useful guidance about the types of team member roles that you can include in your application and information about the costings and other eligibility requirements. So all of these links will be going in the slide pack that we will add to Funding Finder. But in the meantime, you can find all of these links on the opportunity specification itself if you need to know more. Next slide, please, Megan. Yes, the flexible rules. So to support the meaningful inclusion of project co-leads from UK business, third sector and government organisations, we've added 3 flexibilities within the ESRC standard rules for funding opportunities. First off, you can allocate more than the usual 30% of total costs at 100% full economic cost to project co-leads from UK business, third sector and government organisations. Secondly, the combined time commitment of staff from those non-academic partners can exceed 1 year full-time equivalent for the duration of the project. And thirdly, if you're a project co-lead from a government organisation, which includes local authorities and MCAs and such, you can claim staff salary costs if you can evidence that the role is being backfilled. And that's actually a new ESRC role, and the policy's been updated, so you can also take advantage of that for other funding opportunities. In terms of the ratio of funding that you might allocate to different partners and the time commitment, it is entirely up to you to decide what ratio and approach works best for your proposed centre design. But in all cases, you have to clearly explain and justify your proposed approach within your application. And I would say generally that assessors tend to be looking for a ratio that feels balanced, proportionate and reasonable for the centre design that you're proposing. So as long as it's not wildly uneven or, you know, a ratio that an ordinary person might construe as being unreasonable, I think you'd be okay. You can find all details about the 3 flexibilities in the opportunity specification under who can apply. And you can, of course, email the team at workinglives@esrc.ukri.org if you've got any specific questions. Next slide, please, Megan. So what the assessors are looking for when they're going to be reviewing your proposals, they're actively going to want to see a clear and compelling vision, delivered via a coherent, interconnected and well-structured programme of work, which is in turn underpinned by a rigorous methodological approach based on best practice, and ideally drawing on place-based and whole system ways of working. And absolutely you need, as everyone has already said in all of the presentations, a strong focus on real-world outcomes supported by clear and realistic pathways to impact. And to ensure that all of that is deliverable, they're going to want to see that you have genuine and meaningful collaboration between any academic and non-academic partners that might be on your bid, that those relationships are supported by strong governance mechanisms, and that you have a strong team capability in place to deliver on your work programme. And all of that needs to be underpinned by evidence of full adherence to the What Works Network membership principles. And next slide, please, Megan. So again, at this point, it's worth highlighting that we will not fund proposals that clearly duplicate the work of other current What Works centres, that wholly focus on only a single age group, e.g., you know, for example, just young people or just older workers. We won't fund proposals that wholly focus on only one type of ill health, one type of long-term health condition or disability. So, for example, proposals that would only focus on mental health or just diabetes or just musculoskeletal conditions are not in scope. And we won't fund proposals that rely solely on qualitative or solely on quantitative research methods. It's also worth stressing that clinical trials and associated studentships are not eligible for inclusion in this particular funding opportunity. Next slide, please, Megan. So in terms of where to find more help and information if you need it, for questions about the opportunity itself, the application process, or the ESRC funding rules, your first port of call should be the opportunity specification and also the ESRC research funding guide, all of which is on the ESRC website. I would also suggest contacting your university research teams because they are an invaluable source of knowledge and expertise, and they generally have the information and the answer to your question. But of course, again, you're both very welcome to get in touch with the team and we will do our best to answer any questions. For queries about the funding service itself and your application via TFS, you will need to email or phone the dedicated TFS help desk. So I've put the contact details on this slide, but they are also listed in the opportunity specification itself. Right, next slide, please, Megan. So that was a veritable gallop through the opportunity and the policy landscape. And I am now going to hand over to my colleague Francesca, Head of Public Policy Research and Place-Based Strategy at the ESRC, who's been keeping a beady eye on the live Q&A and will be facilitating the question session now. Over to you, Francesca.
Thanks so much, Annie. What an amazingly informative session today, and the questions have been coming in. So attendees were invited to submit questions when they registered for this session. So we have had some questions in advance. Some of those we hope that we have kind of headed off in the material that we presented to you today. We've done that as much as possible. But in addition, you have been submitting questions live, and we'll go through some of those, as many as we can get through in the time allocated. Just to note, if we don't manage to get through everything, which I imagine is possible, we will be publishing an FAQ document after this event, and that will include answers to any questions that we can't get around to answering live. Could I ask ESRC and DWP colleagues who are available to answer questions just to switch on their cameras? That would be super helpful. So there have been some sort of themes emerging from the questions to date. Some of them have been around kind of leadership, collaboration, so composition of a leadership team, who sort of potential applicants might partner with or collaborate with, around the centre's role to generate, test and scale effective solutions. Those have been some of the kind of the themes that have been coming through. So just to kind of start, and this is probably for ESRC colleagues, this is about sort of leadership. What stage of career would you expect for someone leading this? And if I'm not yet at that stage, how can I get involved?
James, I don't know if you want to do this one or do you want me to do this one?
I'm happy to start, and please do chip in, Annie. So the opportunity specification doesn't actually doesn't specify the leadership team in terms of early career researchers, mid-career, late career, but I think it is really clear on expectations around leadership. So the project lead should have really strong leadership and management and stakeholder engagement skills, and the leadership team should be, to quote the specification, internationally recognised experts across a spread of relevant domains, so labour markets, employment, public health, local and regional, public policy, and evidence synthesis. So they need to be internationally recognised experts. But this doesn't mean that we don't want early career researchers involved in those teams, and we do want early career researchers involved. And I think they can be involved through, for example, work package theme leads. If they're not on the leadership team, they can be embedded in ways that build capability, or even thinking about succession planning for the leadership roles. But Annie, I don't know if you wanted to build on that, flesh that out at all.
No, I think that's absolutely right, James. What I'd say is that from experience of sitting on other panel decisions is that assessors love to see career development structures built into centres like this. So especially as James has just mentioned, what you might have, for example, is on a work programme, you have a slightly more junior member of staff acting as a co-lead, and they're supported and mentored by a slightly more established member of staff. I think it's just about getting the balance, is that you don't want necessarily a centre that's just filled with just well-established members. You want that sort of the succession and the ability to flex across different career stages so that you're building capability within the community as well. I'll leave it at that.
Super, thanks, Annie. Thanks, James. Building on that in terms of kind of wider sort of collaborative efforts and kind of partnerships, is the expectation that the What Works Centre builds deep partnerships with a select group of local and regional stakeholders, or that it establishes a wider national network of collaborators?
I mean, in an ideal world, a bit of both, to be honest. I think you're going to have to build at least a core set of stakeholders in the beginning to show to assessors that you have the necessary relationships and networks in place. But it should absolutely be open to the wider community. We don't want to fund a centre that's sort of closed off to everybody else. James, I don't know if you want to say something here.
Just to deliver some of the objectives, for example, around generating, testing and scaling solutions, you will need to develop relationships and partnerships in quite some depth with local and regional partners. So we do expect that, definitely. But I think Annie's right, it needs to be a balance between those type of detailed and durable partnerships and that broader network approach to ensure that the centre can have broader influence and impact. I don't know whether DWP colleagues want to add anything on that question either.
I mean, my thing, James, like you said, it's a bit of a mix of the two. We certainly wouldn't want something that ended up being particularly geographically constrained. So if I was going to emphasise one, it would probably be that national reach, but a sort of a mix of the two could be quite a nice approach.
Thank you. We've had a question around, I think this was submitted before the webinar, but on this theme of kind of collaboration, specifically around kind of businesses or sort of non-academic organisations, and what our role as funders might be in sort of enabling and facilitating collaboration. So how will you be enabling and supporting contribution and collaboration from SME organisations and those in the third sector with expertise in work and health?
I'm happy to make a start on that one, and then others please chip in. So this call is built explicitly around co-production and partnership. So proposals must include project co-leads and project partners from outside of academia, with obviously a preference for regional and local actors. And Annie, you might want to say something in a moment about our policy framework, because I believe we've recently clarified our framework and clarified it in ways that enable us to fund co-leads from UK businesses, the third sector, and government bodies at an increased rate. So I'll bring you in on that. But what I will say is what we can't do is matchmake consortia on a case-by-case basis. That's just not possible. But from this call today, we have a list of people who have attended the webinar, and you will have all signed, hopefully, something saying that you're happy for your contact details to be shared. So we will share that so you can all see who's interested in the opportunity. Annie, do you want to say a bit more about our policy framework?
I don't really have much more to say other than what I've already said shared in the slide before, and what's already in the opportunity specification. So I think it's as James says, is that in terms of getting meaningful collaborations with project co-leads from the UK third sector business and government organisations, we flex the rules to enable that to happen in terms of being able to allocate more than the 30% of the total value of funding available, and also more than the one full-time equivalent team member role. But in matchmaking, we don't unfortunately have capacity to enable that. If you're struggling on that point, we will have the networking list if you've ticked yes on this particular registration for this webinar. You could also have a look at the ESRC's LinkedIn post on this funding opportunity. I've noticed that some people have posted under that looking for collaboration or highlighting that they're interested in this funding opportunity. You can also email us at ESRC, and if we do hear of other people who are looking for connections, we might be able to put you in touch. But I can't guarantee that because we don't always know who's going to be applying until after the deadline.
Super, thank you. Annie, one for you, and this is a very specific question, but I note it's been upvoted a couple of times. If we don't know the answer on the spot, we can kind of reply in due course. Can HDRC's health determinants research collaborations be project co-leads?
That is, I'm not 100% sure, because I'm not 100% sure where you would fall if you're not on the UKRI eligibility list, but you would classify yourself as either a UK business, third sector or government organisation, then yes. Maybe we'll take that away and give you a definitive answer on that one. It's worth noting that there's a lot of NHS trusts who are already on the UKRI eligibility list. So if you're one of those, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Annie. Just again on kind of the centre and kind of what it might look like. Is it envisaged that this is a physical centre or a collaborative multi-site centre? James, Annie, probably an ESRC question.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be lovely to have a physical centre, but equally, I think we recognise it's jolly expensive, isn't it? And not really feasible. I think all of us were thinking of a sort of a multi-geographical collaboration consortium that you would have people based across the UK doing different things, and that you would sort of share facilities as with other ESRC centres, depending on who's got free rooms available. But perhaps I'm overreaching myself. James, I don't know if you've got something to say, or Mike.
No, I mean, the call isn't prescriptive on this point, actually. And I think, Annie, what you've said is right. It could be a multi-site centre, or you could propose there to be a specific dedicated site. It really is down to you and what you think would work best for the centre. But it does need to feel like one centre operationally, with a really clear delivery system and a clear entry point for stakeholders. So that's the absolute key thing. I think the specification also says you need to include budget for in-person advisory meetings, for example, with policymakers and practitioners, and that should be probably across the country as well. So just to flag that as a consideration.
I mean, it's also worth noting here that we have many other ESRC research centres that are based across multiple sites, and the key thing tying them in is a really great website that your audience can find and use, which in today's modern world is probably the easiest way of accessing people.
Thanks, Annie. On that mention of other ESRC investments, there was a question submitted beforehand as well about whether or not potential applicants could approach ESRC investments to work on this application with them.
And yes, absolutely. I mean, it depends whether you just want to approach them to find out what they're doing to make sure you're not duplicating their work, in which case go for it. But we can't guarantee that they will respond to your email, because obviously they're going to be really busy doing their own research, and we can't mandate them to reply to you. If you're at a current ESRC research centre, or you're on a current UKRI grant and would like to participate in the successful centre in terms of a bid, you can absolutely be a project lead or a project co-lead, as long as your time across all of the UKRI awards does not exceed 100% full-time equivalent. There are quite stringent rules on that. Your research office will be able to give you details about how to deal with that, and it is the responsibility of the lead research organisation to ensure that no one named on the grant has more than 100% of their time allocated across UKRI awards.
Thanks, Annie. Just jumping onto a question that's just been posted now, just because it ties back to something that's been discussed recently. It's just asking for clarification about what we mean when we say local, regional and national networks. Are we meaning England as a national network and Wales as a separate national network, or do we mean the whole of the UK as the national network? Maybe DWP might want to take that.
I think this is probably one of those questions that sounds incredibly simple, like we should have a very definitive answer to it. But I think we're going to have to come back with some more specifics on it. I would say that while most of the kind of devolution that we're talking about is focused on England, I think we are, we would be interested in kind of relevant things that are going on in Wales and Scotland as well. But let us take that away and come back with a more definitive line on it.
Thank you. There have been a few questions coming up in the chat this afternoon around the Centre's role to kind of generate, test and scale effective solutions. James, I'll throw these over to you, but then if DWP colleagues want to come in, that would be fantastic. But just for these questions about sort of methodologies and kind of approaches. So what are your expectations about the balance mix of this new What Works Centre in terms of focusing on reviewing existing evidence versus conducting new primary research, including trials?
So the objectives, I think, are quite clear that we expect both the reviewing of the existing evidence base as well as supporting the testing, generating and trialling of new solutions. And the specification actually sets out some sections on methodological rigour. So proposals should consider what their methodological standards are for evidence generation and include criteria for quality, relevance and rigour. And we've also asked that proposals ensure that they are clearly linked and aligned with recognised frameworks for ranking evidence. So, for example, the Maryland Scientific Methods Scale. We've also said in the specification that we anticipate that experimental and quasi-experimental methods will form a core part of the Centre's methodological approach. But we do recognise as well the value of theory-based methods, process evaluations, mixed methods research, and we really welcome proposals that integrate those types of methods, robust quantitative methods with RCTs, with qualitative research, and where appropriate, also participatory approaches as well. But we do recognise that RCTs need to be done well, and implementation is often not that straightforward. And the evaluation of new interventions needs to be relevant and robust. One of the questions I think also asked about whether the Centre will fund RCTs. One of the objectives in the specification is to support testing and evaluating of solutions, especially where evidence gaps exist. So you might make provision in your budget to support, for example, small-scale trials. How you do that is down to you to propose. It is worth saying we're not expecting the Centre to be funding intervention delivery, as we know that can be quite costly. So you might, for example, look where you can piggyback on intervention plans that are already in place and develop RCT plans around that with local and regional partners. I think that's probably all I'll say on that, unless there are any other angles there I've not addressed or the DWP colleagues want to come in.
No, completely agree, James.
Also, just a very quick thought that this isn't to say that you can't bring funding in from elsewhere as well. If there are partners that are, for example, designing an intervention and they have funding to support the evaluation or an RCT around that intervention, you can certainly consider taking on further funding alongside the ESRC and DWP funding if it fits our strategic objectives.
Thank you. A couple of points specifically on RCTs and I think picking up on some of the material covered in the presentation earlier. And is there agreement amongst the commissioning team that RCTs are essential? Is there an expectation that the centre will fund RCTs, or they have to convince others to fund them? And then another question or comment / question, RCTs are very difficult to combine with co-design and are not seen as a gold standard in all policy practice evaluations. Will this be taken into account when applications are reviewed? Yeah, grateful for reflections on those points.
I think I addressed all of those points, Francesca. So I saw them in the chat, and I've addressed them in what I've just said.
Yeah, fabulous. Question for DWP colleagues around sort of going back to this point about sort of engagement. Could DWP comment on how the What Works Centre will interact with other engagement they have with the MCAs, for example, expectations around evaluation in integrated settlements?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'd say, I would recognise that everything in the devolution space creates a very complex landscape. And I think in terms of this opportunity and how that relates to those conversations with integrated settlements and kind of other forms of devolution, that first phase of user engagement is kind of really clear, really key there. So we'd expect the centre to be working with areas that have got integrated settlements to kind of work through what the gaps are and what that means for what the centre should be focused on. But like I say, I recognise it's a really complicated landscape, and that work to ensure that there isn't duplication as far as can be avoided is particularly important.
Thank you. Another question, I think probably for you, Mike, around kind of the focus of a potential centre. Would you expect work streams that focus on different categories of unemployed, for example, young, old, health conditions, etc., even though these shouldn't be the sole focus?
So I think I'm going to hedge a bit on that. I think we've been trying to be quite clear in the specification that none of those particular groups, so youth groups, particularly given we got a What Works Centre in the Youth Futures Foundation and the Youth Endowment Funds that kind of operate in that space. So we clearly wouldn't expect that to be a focus, but we're not excluding anything that kind of involves those groups at all. So I think there's a degree of flexibility there, but we certainly wouldn't expect to see things that specifically focus on one of those groups playing any major part.
Thanks very much. A question here about sort of evidence and data. The point around sort of evidence and data being sort of different things. Is there an expectation, hope, that the centre will include work streams that seek to solve data sharing and raw and secondary data collection issues? Or is the aim that the centre would find examples of places that have solved similar data sharing issues and point other authorities to that work, rather than doing hands-on problem solving of data issues?
Okay, so I'm kind of laughing because I spend an awful lot of my life in kind of data sharing issues in DWP. In a word, no, I wouldn't expect kind of a key focus to be on data sharing, data linking. I would say DWP is well aware and is kind of working through various issues to do with data sharing between us, central government, and local actors. But we don't expect that to be something that the centre would focus on, nor, and I saw there's another question around DWP kind of helping centres work through data sharing issues, and I'm afraid I think the same answer holds true there. Of the simple answer is no, we don't expect that to be a focus. Having said that, we of course are always interested in hearing about what kind of key difficulties are caused by particular issues with data sharing, or hearing about particular areas of good practice.
Thank you. Couple of questions for ESRC colleagues, Annie, possibly for you, around sort of costs, and then there's one about sort of commissioning process as well. So on costs, can you give any indication of your expectations about how budget should be allocated across different activities? Specifically, trials can be expensive. Yeah, I think that's probably a reference back to the...
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because we've chosen not to be prescriptive on this, because we know that, depending on your approach, different approaches can cost different amounts of money, and it's ultimately it's really up to you to decide. You have full flexibility to decide how you want to allocate the budget, either in terms of your non-academic partners, academic partners versus your particular activities and work streams. Again, I think it's about being proportionate, reasonable and transparent in your approach. So as long as you make the case in your application and that a reasonable assessor would think that it was a reasonable approach, you won't have a problem. And because we haven't mandated a particular ratio within the opportunity specification, which is the thing that assessors will be using when they assess your proposal, you won't be penalised as long as, you know, it's. I mean, obviously, if you were only going to spend about 5% of your budget on knowledge mobilisation activities, that's probably not a good approach. But whether it's, I don't know, you know, 45 or 50 or 55, it's entirely up to you. Unless, of course, James, you've got a very different view on the matter.
Anything else to add to that, Annie? I think that's a good summary.
Perfect, thanks. Question about flexible fund. Would we expect the What Works Centre to have one?
I have the answer for you on this because it came through ahead of time. And no, we do not expect it. But if you did choose to include one, you just need to make sure that you fully justified it within the costings and your approach, and that you have a strong governance mechanism around it, so that assessors and ESRC and DWP have assurance that it is going to be appropriately managed.
Thank you. I would like to be a project lead on the basis of a job share. Is this allowed?
Yes, you can absolutely be a project lead on the basis of a job share. So unfortunately, our system doesn't allow you to apply on the basis of a job share. Somebody, one of you, would have to come in as the lead the project lead on the system, and that's where all the correspondence goes, and that's the RO who deals with all the money. But in all the practical terms, you would be doing it as a co-share, and you would also need to explain that within your proposal.
Thank you. A question about sort of discussing further with co-funders. As this is a joint opportunity with DWP, are we able to discuss our application directly with DWP? This is a question about DWP, but Annie, I think, should take it. Yeah.
Yes, I will answer this. So absolutely not. No. So neither ESRC nor DWP can comment on either an individual proposal or individual ideas relating to a specific proposal. This is to make sure that the competitive process is entirely transparent, fair and open, and that nobody has any potentially unfair advantage over anybody else. So no. I mean, absolutely, you can get in contact with us if you think something's unclear from the opportunity specification. You just need clarification, yes, but we cannot comment on individual proposals.
Super, thank you. Apologies if we didn't get to your question. I've tried to cover a range there to represent the questions that we've received. As noted, we'll be sort of collating them all and publishing an FAQ in due course. Thank you very much. Panel, over to you, Annie.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Yes, I mean, goodness, that has been a whistle-stop tour, and I think we all deserve a hot drink and a biscuit to recover from this. So thank you very much to everybody who stuck with us, and thank you very much to all of our presenters and question responders. So the next steps is that we will get this recording, the slide pack and the FAQ up on Funding Finder in due course. I cannot guarantee dates, unfortunately. We'll also try and email everybody who's registered to this webinar with the FAQ as soon as we've got it ready, as well as with the networking spreadsheet. But that's it. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. Cheerio, cheerio.